So slow down. That is the essence of staying present in your work. So you want to probe significant moments that reveal character. When you're present, you're receptive, you're broken open. There's a surrender to the work. You receive what creativity has to offer. There's less resistance. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach. And each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. What do you do when the writing becomes hard or it starts to feel heavy, when it stops being fun? In this episode, I'll coach you through. We'll look at why you're getting blocked or stuck or feeling hopeless, and I'll give you a 3-step process to circumvent these feelings so you can find the flow, connection, and joy in your writing again. Now, if I had to pick one thought pattern that comes between you and your writing, it's this: too much focus on the outcome. So there's outcome over process. If I do this, I'll get this result. If I follow this structure, I'll save time, I'll have a story that works, and presto, it'll be a hit. So many writers put their story on a production schedule. I'll get the first draft done in 3 months. I'll get it polished up by such and such a date, then send it out, and it will be a done deal. Another way this shows up is following off-the-shelf structures, like Save the Cat, the hero's journey, the snowflake method, or the grid method. There's nothing wrong with these structures. We need them, but we don't need them at the outset. Structure is a way of thinking your way through your story as you write it. Sometimes it's quantifiable. I'll write 1,000 words a day for 3 months and I'll have a novel at the end of it. Or I'll write my first draft, revise it, and then self-publish. Now, getting published is a worthy goal. We write to share our work, to be read. That is the end goal. There's nothing wrong with setting goals and moving towards an outcome. It just isn't the best way to create, and the timing is off. Now, I've been taking online workshops with the acting coach, Benjamin Mathis, and he has this great analogy as it relates to actors, but it's relevant to any artist, really. He calls it plating the dish. So if you think of a chef, the first thing he does is not plate the dish. He sources the ingredients, the spices, the vegetables, the sauces, the rice, whatever. He then cooks the dish. Maybe he follows a recipe or he creates his own recipe. He cooks it, and only then, after all of that, he plates the dish. So getting published and everything that's involved with that, finding a book cover, finding an agent, that shouldn't be the goal right out of the gate, especially if this is your first attempt at writing a novel or you're working through a first draft. Don't plate the dish first. Source your ingredients. Let it cook. Then plate the dish. By the way, this is why so many writers give up, or they fall out of love with their story. They eventually stop writing because they've lost their own connection to the story itself, because their eye is on the end goal, not the process that gets them there. They're writing to please an invisible audience rather than themselves. It's thinking of your book as a commercial commodity rather than a work of art that's in process. Now, the majority of writers I work with are not just after commercial success. They have a much deeper and more personal reason for writing their book. I think most writers do. But they think that in order to validate their existence as a writer, they need to hit the apex of success, publication. But success is not a single event. And when you treat your work in progress like a commodity, you're putting the horse before the cart. You're plating the dish. And there are a lot of ways this shows up. Writers ask, what genre is this? How would I sell this? Will it get published? Am I good enough? And all of that makes you anxious. It's not good for creativity. Now, a lot of writers think this is a good strategy. Have goals, specific goals, and you'll reach them sooner. But that's linear thinking, and the creative process is not linear. And when you think, if I write it this way, then people will like it, when you're trying to please an audience, you wind up doing the opposite. You wind up diluting your voice, diluting your vision. Many writers write with a particular type of reader in mind, what a reader will like or want. And this is when they turn to those off-the-shelf structures. Again, nothing wrong with the structures, but it doesn't speed up the process. It actually delays it, and in many cases stops it completely. Success is not a singular event. It's not when you get published. That's one success, but there are hundreds of successes along the way. You started. That's a success. You wrote the first few scenes. Success. You're making your way through your first draft. Success. You wrote for an hour this morning. Success. So focus on what the work needs from you rather than what you need from the work. I hear so many writers worrying about their book cover. Should I publish on KDP? Should I work with a vanity publisher? Should I go the traditional route, or should I self-publish? And what happens is they get rejected because the story isn't cooked yet. They haven't even sourced their ingredients. So they get rejected, or their story doesn't sell, and they give up. And they're so disconnected from their work at this point, their original impetus for writing it in the first place, there's no joy in it. It's transactional. It's this or that, good or bad. And then it starts to feel more like an obligation rather than devotion to the art and craft. Writing is transformational. It's not transactional. It's transformational for you through the writing and, by extension, the reader. So don't think of your work in progress as a commodity. That's no way to create. Now, is there a time to sell your work to agents and publishers? Of course. It's just not a great way to create in the beginning. The only decisions you need to make right now happen at the keyboard. When you think of your work in progress as a commodity, you start doubting yourself, and then you get into this self-doubt spiral. Who am I to write this? What made me think I could write a novel? When you're focused on outcome over process, you start operating in fear, projecting a negative outcome, and this isn't good for creativity. It doesn't give you freedom in the work, it blocks you. And it's probably not feeling free, spontaneous, or joyful. So, number one, you want to focus on what the work needs from you, not what you need from the work. So the next question is, what does your work need from you? Well, 3 things: purpose, presence, and practice. So let's start with purpose. Many writers think they're writing for an audience. So they start writing for an audience and they distort their vision. They turn to these off-the-shelf structures to appeal to this invisible audience of readers. And yes, while you are ultimately writing for the reader, the only way to ultimately engage a reader is to engage with your story yourself. As Rick Rubin says, your self-expression allows the audience to have their own self-expression. So you want to ask, why does this story matter to you? What was the initial impetus? When did this story first come to you? What are you trying to learn, discover, understand, or feel through this piece of writing? Writers tend to use their works in progress to probe answers to questions that continue to obsess them over the course of their career or through their body of work. And you'll see this with authors whose books you read. You'll see common themes that certain authors obsess about and explore. Some authors focus on family relationships, others on love relationships. Other authors probe moral dilemmas. Others, particularly in memoir, are trying to understand what happened in the past, so it's an excavation of self. But there's always a question at the heart of a story. One way to get in touch with that is to think back to when this story first came to you. What was the initial spark? Was it a memory, an image? Is there moral outrage over injustice? What is it about this story that refuses to let you go? Journal about that. Don't overthink it. The purpose can't solely be about getting published. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with that goal, but it's not enough to sustain the time and energy it takes to write a story worthy of being published. So when you find yourself feeling separate from the work, or it feels like an obligation, or you're just not having fun with it, you've lost the flow, and then it starts to feel heavy and burdensome. Just bring yourself back to your purpose for starting this story in the first place. Writing can be a lonely, isolating experience, especially when you're lost in the mess of your draft, overwhelmed by the volume of your ideas, and you don't know how to wrangle all of it into a coherent structure. My free 3-act worksheet gives you a clear framework so you know exactly what your beginning, middle, and end need to do. So you can think your way through your story with more clarity and intention. It won't write the story for you, but it will give your ideas somewhere to land. Grab it free at nancypanuccio.com/act. nancypanuccio.com/act. Okay, on to number 2, presence. When you're present in the work, you're not worrying about whether it's good or not. You're not thinking about whether people will care to read it or not, whether it will ever get published or not. You're not asking, am I any good? All those are projections into the future. When you're present, you're delighting in your own discovery about what your story is about. You're reveling in your own process. Now, presence doesn't just mean you resist distraction, like put your phone in another room, which you probably should, or close down your browser tab so you don't hop on Facebook or Instagram and get sucked into the latest political drama. You probably should close down your browser tabs. That is an aspect of presence. But what I mean by presence is it's an integration of your living experience, your humanity, and your fiction, your memoir, your short story, your screenplay. Characters are fully human. They're dimensional. What exists in you exists in your characters. What's vulnerable in you is vulnerable in your characters. So you want to ask, how does my reality, belong in my fiction? How does my reality integrate with my characters? If you bring the fullness of your humanity to the page, you bring the fullness of humanity to the character. It's how you avoid the one-note character. So being present is asking, how do I belong in my characters? What part of me exists in them? This is especially true when writing characters who do bad things. For example, just as I was preparing for this podcast, I started reading a story about a man who kills his wife. He stabs her while his 2 children are asleep. Now, the author's experience was not stabbing someone, let alone his wife, but that doesn't mean he didn't connect some part of himself to this character. He used his imagination to find a part of himself in the character. Here's an example. This is from Edward P. Jones' story, The Sunday Following Mother's Day. When Madeline Williams was 4 years old and her brother Sam was 10, their father killed their mother one night in early April. Okay, so boom, we get the long shot. It goes on a little more, and we learn that the dad doesn't plead innocent. He does not want to be defended. He admits his guilt. Now, a lesser writer could say that he just felt terrible about stabbing his wife, that he was guilt-ridden, that it was a moment of rage, and that he wasn't in his right mind. But the author never gives us the shorthand. He reveals all of that by slowing down where it hurts and staying present. Here's the excerpt. When Maddie arrived at the apartment that morning, she found her brother sitting in near darkness on the floor near the couch, the telephone resting like a black pet on his lap. Samuel was dressed only in his underwear. There was no sign of trouble about him that she could see, and for a bit, this gave her comfort, and this is what she told the courtroom one sweltering day in July. But in his bedroom, she found her sister-in-law dead, head down, sitting on the floor with one leg under her in a giant pool of drying blood. In her left hand, the greatest friend of Maddie's life gripped a hairbrush, and her right hand was open, also resting on the floor, palm up, as if expecting a small surprise to be dropped into it. It seemed to Maddie right then that all the innocence and joy and kindness had seeped out of Agnes Marie Williams and had become the pool of blood about her. The floor tilted, and so the blood had flowed through the night in several thin lines from the dead woman, and one line had been heading directly toward where Maddie was standing in the doorway. Okay, so another way to be present in the writing is to slow down where it hurts rather than race through it. Many writers write in a kind of shorthand to get the story finished, and so they write on the surface. They write longer rather than deeper. They go for breadth rather than depth. You want the opposite. You want depth rather than breadth. Presence means you're slowing down, probing a moment for what it reveals about a character. If you stay present in those significant moments of your story, you'll be far more engaged and fascinated with your own story. You'll discover the story that you're writing. So slow down. That is the essence of staying present in your work. So you want to probe significant moments that reveal character. When you're present, you're receptive, you're broken open. There's a surrender to the work. You receive what creativity has to offer. There's less resistance. So you want to ask, how does the story awaken what's alive in me? That's what presence is. When you're present, you're in flow. There's freedom in the work. There's curiosity, joy. There's depth. Okay, on to number 3, practice. Writing is a lifetime practice. You're always evolving. You're always improving. If you think of it as a practice, you can't make mistakes. You can't move backwards. You can only move forwards. When you see writing as a practice, it's easy. You're not trying to get it right before you start. You're loosening your grip on getting it right. Flow moves downhill, not uphill. It's transformational. And you stop thinking of your writing in if-then terms. If I do this, I'll write a story that's publishable. Again, if you think of it as a practice, there's not too much focus on the end result. In the context of practice, you can't make mistakes. Nothing you do is wrong. It's leading you closer to the story you're trying to tell. You can only move forward. It is a rigorous practice, and you never stop learning. You never stop evolving. There's no going backwards when you think of it as a practice. All great athletes, musicians, dancers, singers, etc., continually practice. Many years ago, I worked in the performing arts department of a multi-arts complex. And we had all of these artist residencies every month. We had musicians, we had pianists, we had dance companies. For example, I'll never forget when Shai Wasner, a great pianist, drove up to the Catskills of New York from Brooklyn. Now, he was there for a week-long residency. He was performing that coming Saturday, and the first thing he did was not have lunch, which had been prepared for him. The first thing he did was find the piano he'd be performing on, and he went to practice. He practiced several hours every day up until the performance. It was not a new piece for him. He'd been doing this selection of music for years, but he still practiced because he knew that there was still room for improvement. The great Twyla Tharp, who's been doing the same dance routines for decades, would come up for a residency, and for 2 weeks before the performance, she would be rehearsing her dance company day in and day out. There's no real mystery. These are not special unicorns. They work. They practice. It's like yoga. Some days the practice feels better than others. Some days we're more flexible or in flow. Some days we're more stiff and the poses don't feel as good in our body. But we're always improving. We're never getting worse at the practice. It's a lifetime practice. And when you think of it as a practice, you're always evolving. You're not getting worse. You're always learning. You're learning and practicing new techniques. You're learning what your story is about. You learn what it is you have to say. It gives you a sense of play. Play is the spirit that infuses everything you write. It gives you access to practice. It allows you to create without self-judgment. So think of your writing as a lifelong practice. In the context of practice, you're always evolving and getting better. So 1, purpose. 2, presence. And 3, practice. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.